Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the third day of the Rebuilding Macroeconomics annual conference. It's a great pleasure to have you all here. And we've got a very full agenda throughout the day. And I'm delighted to say we have our guest host, who is Carolina Alves, who's the Joan Robinson Fellow, Research Fellow at Girton College, Cambridge. She will be hosting us through the day, and so hopefully keeping everybody to time, just like the last 2 days, and then we can manage to have a full discussion. So I'm going to immediately pass over to Carolina, and please do type any questions into the chat box. Carolina.
Thank you, Angus. Yeah, I'm trying to keep everybody on time with a kind of a Brazilian twist, perhaps. So, hello, thank you everyone for being here. Today is the last day of this amazing conference that Rebuilding Macro has, the Rebuilding Macro team has put together. And I would like to say a few words about the entire conference and the project, and then our opening remarks by Sam Beckett before actually I give the floor to Sam. So it's remarkable to look back and see everything that Rebuilding Macro project has achieved since its inception in middle 2017. So I have been very lucky to kind of follow all this very closely. Initially, actually being very curious about the project. Was a project that came out of a ESIC call that highlighted two long-standing criticisms towards the dominant paradigm in academic macroeconomics. So the first one was the criticism related to a kind of monoculture in our field. And the second one relates to a kind of a perceived disconnection between academic macroeconomics and policymakers and practice. So that's what Rebuilding Macro then kind of come into a full body in trying to address these questions. The call also encouraged the winners to take risks, by looking to interdisciplinary projects, but also new methods, which meant funding projects that may be unlikely to receive funding from traditional sources. So for those who didn't know before, that was why Rebuilding Macro exists. But with time, I have also become part of our Rebuilding Macro advisory board, along with the TUC, CBI, the ESIC, members of the private sector, and also other academics. And that position is what actually gave me a different view of what was happening, because I could see the making of all this. So I got to know specific projects, the commitment by the Rebuilding Macro team in opening the field to other disciplines and perspectives, new methods, and also to creative and yes, risky, but also innovative research. From this position, I saw the hard work that goes behind the scenes by people who, quite honestly, just want to stretch and strengthen the field, offering different insights to new policy questions that society faces today. So that's why I would like to join the chair from yesterday's conference, William Hines, who was congratulating Angus, who together with his management team, with his host institutions, NISA, and also Richard, Carla, and previously Gavin, that who actually not only managed to keep being authentic in addressing the challenge that were set by the SSC, but also trying to push the boundaries as to where we could find answers for pressuring real-world issues we are facing. So the over 30 projects funded by Rebuilding Macro in the last 3 years provided what I see, so Angus can correct me later on, as a foundation for both this conference today, but also what would be the next steps for Rebuilding Macro. And I divided these foundations, following a lot of discussion with Angus, obviously, into 3 main blocks. The first one is the question of the nature of social reality. which reinforces, and make an out loud claim that macroeconomy is built on social foundations. It is evolutionary and it continuously reinvents itself. So I hope those who attended the first day of the conference were able to get a little taste of what rebuilding macro means by all this. So the second block that I see in that foundation actually embraces this kind of evolutionary aspect, this kind of social aspect, and trying to question, okay, so what are the appropriate methods of analysis in this context? And here is where we have a complexity kind of making its great entrance in macro. Here is where we discuss the issue about emergence, and also endogenous booms, crashes, agglomerations, imbalances, and we emphasize the structure and network of the economies. So here is where rebuilding macro is proposing a rich and also constructive engagement with the current macroeconomics, highlighting that us macroeconomists, we need to have a social epistemology. We need to put more weight on disequilibrium path, on qualitative data, on resilience, on networks. So the last part of this foundation is about us macroeconomists, researchers, academics, and policymakers. And that's why we are here today in these last days, to look into ourselves and also the institutions where we operate. So the previous 2 days of the conference wouldn't have been complete if we didn't really examine ourselves as a group of professional economists. So a culture of expertise is a social cultural analysis of social hierarchies, ethos, and knowledge practices in any field. In macroeconomics wouldn't be different. So if there is a monoculture in our field, we need to look into these social hierarchies, into these ethos and knowledge practices, into the knowledge production in our field. And therefore, universities, central banks, and governments, and so on. We need to understand how these institutions can diversify their knowledge, their network, to then generate a more equitable and effective policy. This, for us, for rebuilding macro, is a key step for a more policy-relevant discipline. So based on that, today we have 2 very exciting panels, one chaired by Professor Gary Dominski, who is also a research hub leader here at Rebuilding Macro. So in that panel I feel like we'll be awarded with 3 fantastic studies looking to this culture of expertise at 3 different levels. So the institutional, Bank of England, but also the issue of citations, journal, and of course, assessment looking to the ref. This is followed by a panel chaired by Claudius Grabner, a research associate at 2 prestigious research centers in Germany and Austria, and also a principal investigator at the Rebuilding Macro. So in this panel, actually, we follow the climate in our discipline as a whole, relating to young scholars, young economists actually challenge the hierarchies within the discipline at many different levels. So we give the platform to them to hear how they feel about macroeconomics, to hear their criticism and insights and suggestions. We then head to the end of the day discussing the next steps for Rebuilding Macro. So here we have the FT journalist and also author Martin Sandbu, who will hopefully get all the main intel from Angus about the roadmap, the next step, and what actually Rebuilding Macro is proposing. But of course, that's not all. The day is complemented with 2 plenaries by 2 amazing women. A policy remark launched by Shadow Minister of Science, Research and Digital, MEP China Nwara, and a key keynote remark this morning by Sam Beckett, co-head of the Government Economic Service and second permanent secretary to the ONS. So I can't really emphasize how lucky we are to have Sam here this morning. As far as I know, she has worked in every big department in the government, acting permanent secretary of the Department for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, Director General for Trade, Europe and Analysis at BIS as well, Director of the Fiscal Group in the Treasury, actually leading, among other things, the fiscal response to the financial crisis. I bet that was very hard work. She helped to establish the Office for Budget Responsibility as well. So I could go on and on for another 10 minutes telling about some, but let me just say that she's definitely an inspiration and a role model for many female economists. So today she enlightens all of us, showing what it looks like to be on the other side of the table as a professional policy advisor. So Sam's position in a number of government departments show us her role very much as a user of statistics, but also in the current post, she's very much a producer of statistics. And I feel that is a unique situation to be in, where she can see things from both sides. And I think the issue here is not only one about getting the statistic right or having a better statistics, but also about how and what we measure in the economy. Because our economic analysis, our narrative, as discussed yesterday, will be driven by these measurements. So we need to know what you're measuring. So anyway, okay, without any further ado, we now have Sam Beckett kicking off our day. So the title of her talk is Data and Macroeconomics Priorities for Government Economists. So thank you, Sam, for being here today. The floor is yours, and you have 30 minutes. Just one point on housekeeping before. So for those who would like to engage in the discussion and asking some questions, you can do that in our chat box. But I would like you to select the option panelists and attendees when doing that, so everybody can read the questions and also engage in that discussion. Thank you very much.
I hope you can all hear me. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Carolina. I'm delighted to be here at the conference today. And I'm wearing two hats, as Carolina said. I'm joint head of the Government Economics Service, which I lead with Claire Lombardelli from the Treasury. And I'm also now second permanent secretary at the Office for National Statistics. I joined 6 weeks ago to work alongside the national statistician, Sir Ian Diamond, and to focus my efforts on economic statistics and data and transforming that side of the business. And my aim today is to try and knit these two hats together, if knitting two hats together isn't too much of a metaphor for this morning, and give you my reflections from these two roles. Looking at how the demands that are being made on the economics community to solve big cross-cutting policy questions is driving innovation in the statistical system, which in turn is bringing new insights for economists. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk briefly about the Government Economics Service and the economics profession, the challenges of measuring a complex modern economy, the empirical turn in economics, and why that means we need a platform for linking data more securely and intelligently, and the move towards more granular and inclusive statistics. And I will finish on bringing that very relevant to the pandemic crisis through looking at real-time indicators. Next slide, please. And just in case it's all too subliminal, this is also an advert for people there in the audience to come and work for us. But if that doesn't suit you, to come and work with us. We are increasingly wanting to reach out and be outward looking and bring all talents to bear from the economics and research community on the big policy questions that we are grappling with. Next slide, please. So, I mean, one thing that perhaps is obvious, but has always really struck me, is that the Government Economics Service is the largest employer of economists in the UK, and we are rapidly growing in size. And I think this is because there's an increasing demand in government for economists and analysts, which is partly, I believe, a recognition of the challenges in understanding that complex economy, which I'll come on to describe. But it also indicates something of the government agenda of demanding greater expertise over the classic civil service in the UK, gifted amateur. And another way in which economics is a little ahead of the curve of the civil service as a whole is through the breadth of representation across Great Britain. I don't want to overclaim on this. Around 3/4 of economists are broadly London-based, but they are well represented elsewhere in the country. The GES is across the UK. The ONS has a small base in London, but a much more of our staff are based in the Newport, as you can see there, and in Titchfield in Hampshire. Thanks. Next slide, please. Now, Angus, in opening the conference, and Carolina in that excellent introduction, talked about the risk of a monoculture in economics. And I think that is a really fantastic question to be debating at the conference. But one thing we do know is that the economics profession isn't as diverse as the population at large. There's a well-rehearsed gender imbalance in economics, which is also true in the government economic service. And the chart on the left-hand side shows in the blue line the proportion of female GES members, and in the red line the proportion of our entry grades. These are the new intake, which you will see in red there. And from looking at the chart on the right-hand side, you can see that the GES is actually attracting more than its fair share of women studying economics in the UK. But the relative unpopularity of economics at uni amongst women makes it hard to make further progress in our profession and in the GES. And the challenge, as we know, is not just in government, and it's not just on gender. And the Royal Economic Society, I know, and others, but the RES are doing some really interesting work on ethnicity in economics, which I am looking forward to seeing the outputs from. In the GES, we're really working on this. In particular, we've created the first degree level economics apprenticeship as a new entry route into government economics. And the signs are really encouraging that on gender, around a half are women, and ethnicity, around a third are BAME. Our apprentices are a more diverse group than our traditional entry route. And I was delighted looking ahead in the programme to see in the panel this afternoon, you've got Felicia Aldermten from the GES and the Black Economists Network. And it's great to see that being represented today at the conference. And I think it's worth also saying what a huge variety of roles economists perform in government. I mean, my career, as Carolina outlined, has spanned economic metric modelling in the Treasury back in the 90s, reforming the competition framework back in the noughties, rebuilding fiscal credibility after the financial crisis and setting up the Office for Budget Responsibility, working on long-term impacts of Brexit at the Department of Business, and now looking at continuing the transformation of economic statistics at the Office for National Statistics. And it's that agenda that I will now turn to, as I currently see it, 6 weeks into the job only, and so full of hope and expectation. Next slide, please, Carla. So the next section of my talk today is really that the economy is changing all the time. And so the way we are measuring it and analysing it has to change too, to try and keep up. And that means the ONS is continuously seeking to improve both its regular statistics, but also innovating and building new partnerships. And I hope I'll also show that statistics make a real difference to policymakers and businesses in taking better decisions. Next slide, please. So the independent review of UK economic statistics by Professor Sir Charlie Bean back in 2016 really helped us to recognise the scale of the challenge we had. And it was a turning point in the ONS's relevance and in our reputation. Two very significant initiatives were given funding: the Economic Statistics Centre of Excellence, or ESCO, and the Data Science Campus. Now, ESCO is dedicated and an academic centre of expertise for economic measurement, one of just a handful of similar institutions around the world. And it's there to challenge and support the ONS and the wider community to improve statistics and aid collaboration in the research field, and to keep us cutting edge. Also trying to perform that function is our own data science campus. This was set up in recognition of a growing skills gap in government and in the profession in data science and in artificial intelligence. They do really innovative work themselves, and they build capability in government through wider collaborations. But the Bean Review also set out some challenges that are very much still with us and which will require continuous focus. Next slide, please, Carolina. So you will know that the economy is increasingly global and companies are very complex. But this is the structure of a real, but obviously anonymized for these purposes, large multinational company that we deal with at the ONS. Not only is that hard to capture at any one moment in time, but it's changing frequently as well. So those are the sort of challenges that we're grappling with for just one company. We need to identify, classify, and sometimes communicate with each reporting unit for statistics purposes. So we have to, looking at this, we have to identify elements of production value that are the UK versus those that should be attributed overseas. We have to assign that to a particular sector. And you might think that was relatively simple, but even determining a manufacturing and services split in output can be increasingly hard. More and more big companies are engaging in contract manufacturing, where one company owns the materials and sells the final product, but they will subcontract their manufacturing to another company. Now, the first company would get captured traditionally as the manufacturer, and the second as a service provider, despite the physical realities really being the other way around. And companies constantly and perfectly legally transfer activity within the group for accounting or tax reasons, and measurements got to try and keep pace and reflect that activity accurately. So in fact, we've set up a large cases unit in the ONS to try and tackle some of these challenges. And we work very closely with the multinationals that we're dealing with, because we recognise that our demands on them are also complex for them and a burden, and it's important that we remain proportionate. Next slide, please. So not only is the economy more complicated, but it's also more intangible and invisible and digital. So the left-hand graph shows business investment in fixed capital. It's tangible versus intangible, showing that around half of all investment is actually intangible. That includes royalties, and branding, and design, and it's very hard to measure. So there's a good story back from 2015 that the Irish economy grew by over 26% in the year. And that was through a combination of multinational companies relocating their intellectual property to their headquarters in Ireland, but also undertaking the contract manufacturing process that I just referred to. Both factors really having a big impact on pushing up the value of the Irish balance sheet. The right-hand side of the graph shows the share of retail sales that are online. Obviously, I like this. It's a very simple example of the digital economy, but it just shows you that long-running upward trend with a big impact recently from the pandemic. And it's a simple, but I think a striking example of how quickly new issues for measurement can arise. But the digital economy is obviously a challenge for statistics in a much broader range of ways. How do you apportion cloud services across different countries? Uber's a great example. Where if you regard that as booking a taxi, you'd classify it as a road transport. But if you're trying to capture the digital intermediary, life gets more complicated. Next slide, please. And then, of course, even if you get your arms around GDP and the national accounts in a traditional sense, people are looking for much better and broader measures of prosperity. And GDP is increasingly being recognised as lacking in that regard, and let alone being a good proxy for well-being and human happiness. There is progress being made on this. This year, in fact, marks 10 years of natural capital measurement in the UK, and we'll be publishing those figures alongside the annual national accounts next week, so do take a look at those. This graph shows how environmental services included in GDP, the small red bar, and those that could be captured outside GDP, the much larger blue bar. And then on the right-hand side, how you might think about breaking those down. And a simple way of thinking about this is a tree worth more cut down for wood? That's the concept captured in the red bar, or left standing, taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and creating a pleasant environment for life and recreation. Those are the concepts you're seeking to capture in the right-hand side of the chart. So the ONS is also producing satellite accounts for human capital and trying to value household production, the work that goes on within people's own homes. And both those things are definitely worth checking out. Other countries also making excellent progress. Last year, New Zealand adopted a happiness index. The government published that alongside a budget that was focused on improving prosperity of local communities. But I think it's partly that issue of trying to maintain international comparability that may be hampering progress in the speed of innovation in some of these measures. If you want the international comparability across national accounts, in a sense, they're determined by the slowest mover in capturing some of these broader concepts. Next slide, please. So in the next section, I want to talk about being able to interrogate and link data, because that is a huge current priority for analysts seeking to shed light on the big policy challenges of today. Next slide, please. There's no denying that economics has become more empirical, and this slide shows that publications are becoming increasingly empirical, and that's really happening across most fields of economic study. And I think a combination of factors are probably at play here. Disillusionment with overly theoretical approaches in economics based on unrealistic assumptions. That's something this conference has focused on, I think, very powerfully. The massive increase in computing power and the reduction in its price, and also the explosion in the availability of data from digital sources. And at the ONS, we're expanding our new and innovative data sets for statistical research purposes. And we make them available via the Secure Research Service. So if academics are interested in our data sets, do come and talk to us. But we recognise that the quite confined Secure Research Service isn't going to be enough for the big cross-cutting policy issues that we face. Next slide, please. If you think about the big challenges that this government has laid out as its policy priorities, strengthening the recovery from COVID-19, levelling up all regions of the UK, achieving net zero by 2050, the always with us improving outcomes in public services, and global Britain, the post-EU transition period trade policy agenda. These are huge cross-cutting topics. They demand a multidisciplinary and collaborative approach, and we want to try and harness skills of analysts inside and outside government. And one way to do that is to create an ability to share and link data in a trusted way. And this is hard enough within government, let me tell you, but we also need to involve the broader scientific and research community as well if we want to bring evidence to these big questions. Next slide, please. So our vision is to create an integrated data platform which would provide the technical and data infrastructure to be able to link data in a collaborative and trusted way. The vision of the IDP is that it will bring together data from across government and beyond and create a strategic evidence base for policy design, monitoring and evaluation. And it will do this in a user-friendly way and in an accessible platform. And I hope, as this slide from our IDP program team in the ONS illustrates, this is a business process challenge as much as a technical one. And there are, of course, security, ethical and legal issues that have to be addressed to achieve this. But rather than spend the next 3 years perfecting the step one, the data ingestion process, the team are very wisely looking at test cases, which they're calling analytical lighthouse projects. They will answer pressing policy questions of the day, but they'll also be there demonstrating the case for a bigger and scaled up IDP. Next slide, please. Now, a good example of this work is ongoing, and it's on towns and high streets. Now, this started out as a relevant linked data for levelling up, but clearly it has big potential for looking at the impacts of the pandemic too. And this project's really teaching us about the challenges of data acquisition and storage, security, linkage, dissemination, and that's all incredibly valuable as a test case. A huge number of perspectives need to be brought to bear. The data sets are very siloed. You've got information on health, you've got information on crime, you've got information on income, and a lot of collaborators have to be involved. And as the picture there on the right-hand side shows you, even defining a town centre requires considerable work and can be challenging. But the prize is huge. I mean, looking back a few years, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, that are obviously involved in this Towns and High Streets project, published an excellent evaluation of the Troubled Families Unit work. That took 2 years for them to put together. And that was just putting in place the memorandums of understanding for data sharing between all the local authorities and other partners. Now, the ambition for the IDP is that complex analysis of that kind could be completed in a matter of weeks. I mean, that is the ambitious vision for this new platform. Next slide, please. And I just want to move on to another topic that I think is very much occupying us at the moment, and that's the search for more granular, inclusive data and statistics. Next slide, please. Now, I hope many of you get the reference here for my rather abrupt title, but just in case, the story is that at an event in Newcastle, the King's College London Europe professor, Anand Menon, invited the audience to consider the impacts of leaving the EU on the UK economy. And a woman from the audience shouted out, "That's your bloody GDP, not ours." Now, this is a true story often told to capture the point that aggregates and averages fail to capture anybody's actual experience and can, in fact, present a massively distorted picture for the majority, a point that's been well made by Andy Haldane and others. And this slide's a good illustration of that. GDP per capita in Camden and the City of London is more than 25 times the level of that in Ards and North Down in Northern Ireland. And next slide, please. And we're not just working on making statistics more granular, we are trying to make them more inclusive. The new UK Statistics Authority's 5-year strategy, Statistics for the Public Good, has inclusivity as a core principle, ensuring our statistics and our workforce reflect the experiences of everyone in society, so that everyone counts and is counted and no one is forgotten. Now, we literally count people at the ONS, and we'll be doing so in the census, which is taking place next March. But alongside that, we have established the Inclusive Data Task Force, which met for the first time yesterday. It's going to be chaired by Dame Moira Gibb, and they're likely to have a public consultation in the remainder of this year, with final recommendations coming back to us in early 2021. And then the ONS's Centre for Equalities will be taking that work forward. And the aim is to help us make a step change in the UK's inclusive data holdings. It's not just for the 9 protected characteristics. It's going to look at income, migration status, geography. It'll look at missing groups like carers and the issue of intersectionality. And next slide, please. I think this question of intersectionality is particularly interesting as another key realization in the inclusion and the inclusive statistics debate. That's the interaction of different personal characteristics for real-world outcomes. And the Inclusive Data Task Force is building on work the ONS has already been doing in this area. This slide shows our recent analysis of ethnicity and disability pay gaps and shows big disparities there. But I think perhaps the more interesting insight is the intersectionality point. On the left-hand chart, we see how gender and ethnicity interact. There's a bigger pay disparity between an Indian man and an Indian woman than there is between a Black Caribbean man and a white British man. And on the right, how the disability pay gap changes significantly depending on the occupations of the people that we're talking about. Next slide, please. And the final point I want to really make is about pace. Obviously, the looking for more timely statistics has been a very long-term quest. But in the current circumstances of the pandemic, waiting even a month for data increasingly feels like it's no longer going to be relevant. Next slide, please. So again, the Office for National Statistics and government is responding to this imperative. We've done this through surveys. The ONS rapidly set up the business impacts of coronavirus survey to respond to the pandemic. It runs every 2 weeks. The results start to be available about 10 days after the reference period. You could actually publish them via the Secure Research Service 2 days after publication. And we can change the questions, which is very important to get in on specific policy issues as they evolve. It's hugely policy relevant analysis, and this is contributing in real time to better decision making. And if you consider even monthly GDP, which was a revelation when we started to get estimates of that, both from outside and from the ONS, they come out around maybe 45 days after the reference period. You know, BIC starts being available in less than 2 weeks. And on the right-hand side, it just shows you, how currently about half of businesses who are currently trading have seen a decrease in their turnover, with the biggest hits, unsurprisingly, there in arts and hospitality. Next slide, please. We've also been using administrative data more. A good example is our work with HMRC using PAYE real-time information. And now, obviously, in its own right, it's given us more timely indicators of employment by region, helping us to understand the labour market impact of the pandemic faster. But it also proved to be a really valuable cross-check on how the pandemic was affecting the collection methods of the traditional labour market survey statistics. It was through the comparison with the PAYE data that we understood that something was going on in the labour market survey, and the shift to exclusively telephone interviews rather than face-to-face for pandemic reasons was a problem for the labour market survey, and we've published some findings on that recently. Next slide, please. And we're also on the subject of real-time indicators, looking beyond government to commercial partners for innovative and timely data. Now, these charts just show a couple of examples of that. Weekly vacancy data by region sourced from Adzuna, which is an online engine for job adverts. And we sourced that via a data access agreement with them. And the daily retail footfall data by region, which is sourced from a company called Springboard via our colleagues at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And on Wednesday, we published some work on the impact on inflation of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. And this used card transaction data that we'd got from the fintech company called Revolut. And their data gave us the spread of transactions each day of the week in restaurants. So we could weight the impact of the discount between the days when the discount applied and when it didn't. Incredibly valuable source of information that we've got through a commercial partner. Next slide, please. Just to sum up then, the world, it's increasingly complex, dynamic, intangible, digital, and interconnected. And the way we measure it and analyze it needs to try to keep pace. That's very challenging. It's also full of opportunity for us and you in the audience. We have people with the skills in government. The GES is growing, it's getting increasingly diverse, and that will help us to meet these challenges. But we certainly recognise we don't have anything like all the answers. We want to continue to work with the academic and research community and commercial partners to improve our insights. And the opportunities with data are increasing and are liable to continue to do so. But to make the best of that, we need to develop new platforms and ways of working. And just to finish, the inclusiveness of our data and our analysis and our profession are and should be priorities. So please do come and talk to us. I'll leave it there, Carolina, and thank you, Carla, for navigating us through the slides.
So thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. I myself have a few questions, and I would like to encourage everyone to drop your questions into our chat box. So I mean, I can't. This was all fascinating, and I couldn't avoid thinking when you were going through your slides on intangible and digital economy, but also the questions of the business impact on the coronavirus survey. It came to my mind the RSA report around 2 weeks ago on work in automation in times of COVID-19, and how they're going through this discussion of job losses and this kind of how COVID-19 has accelerated the pace when it comes to technological changes, and then how the government can keep up with that. What is the exit strategy? Is the idea of retraining laborers and restructure the labor market, or is about really to prop in more money into hospitality and retail job? And that actually generated a kind of a discussion on Twitter, because many people are saying, well, retail sector is still important, is doing slightly better than other sectors. Hospitality is at the center of the pandemic, and these sectors will actually get bigger. So how will we deal with that? So it just came to my mind if I have a few comments on that. So, okay, let me just stop abusing my role as a chair and go to some questions here. So we have a question about a little bit about the job market when it comes to the government economic, the GS. So here we have George Perendian asking that, he have a very long list of various job and education exposures and filling kind of application for different government department jobs make him is a very long process, longer than the average, and certainly longer than for those who actually start in the career. So, that kind of put him in kind of a disadvantage because of his education experience. So, so his question is basically, I cannot possibly apply for as many jobs in different departments as others. What should I do? And basically really asking for your advice here. And actually, I will abuse my role of chair now and ask you about your role as a head of the GES, because I think for us starting our career would be a great opportunity to get some comments from you on that. Okay, so 2 more questions, then I pass the word to you. So we have here a comment which I think is probably related to your talk on how to measure this complex economy, is from David Chester, asking us, we need to generalize the agents and activities to better view what's happening. So I guess it's kind of a little bit in the opposite direction of what you were saying, but I'm not sure. Okay, and then just one question from Angus for this round. There's a chart that you showed that suggested 30% of the GDP can be considered total ecosystem services. How is this put together, Angus is asking you, because it does seem to be a very important issue.
Thank you. That's lots to be getting on with. Let me start actually with the question about how hard it is applying to government for a job. And the Government Economics Service is also very much, a sort of a case in point there. I'm not going to claim that any of this is very easy. What I would say is how setting up the apprenticeship, degree level apprenticeship entry route has been a real education for us in the Government Economics Service HQ as to how difficult these processes are and how that can hold us back in terms of improving our diversity. So I completely accept and echo those comments that we've had from the floor. What we've looked at is how each stage of our multi-stage process, as people enter both the fast stream and apprenticeship, how it changes the diversity of the candidates going through to the next level. And that is incredibly important information. And we've taken, in the apprenticeship route, dealing with small numbers, we've been able to really look at that each time. But, I'm sorry to say, most of the evidence, though it's not completely robust, does show that this multi-stage approach actually mitigates against diversity in many respects. And I think the problem is that, we try very hard to have incredible filtering systems to get people in when we have massive thousands of job applications to go through. You kind of automate that to the greatest degree possible. You use techniques that you do not realise, though they are tested, you don't realise that empirically they're mitigating against the more diverse and the external candidates. So look, this is an agenda that I'm glad has been highlighted in the questioning. It's something that we're very, very mindful of and trying to understand better and change. Second point really about COVID and the pace of technology change, Carolina. I mean, we've all, well, perhaps not all of us, but many of us, and myself included, have had a rapid introduction to the full uses of the technology that we've probably had sitting on our desks for a very long time. The way that we've responded by being able to work from home right across the economy for administrative jobs is absolutely amazing, isn't it? The department I was previously in as lockdown occurred, Bays, had 98% of people up and online within a couple of days, and I know the ONS experience was similar. Companies are looking at this and thinking, well, our estate, we can rationalise this. I think it'll depend how long-standing the non-pharmaceutical restrictions are as to how radical this is and how different a new normal is from the old days of last year. But really, really interesting. I think it's another issue that would be a really cross-cutting, multidisciplinary experiment. And I hope some of the things we've talked about in terms of trying to link data sets and share them securely and get people confident in sharing it would all help to throw light on that subject. The comment on generalising being important for greater understanding of the economy. I mean, I buy that. I think my slides try to sort of stress that the granularity can bring out granularity, or more inclusiveness or more real time can bring out some of those nuances. But I realise, that there is a sort of note of caution there in taking that to a logical extreme. In one respect in which I would remark on that is the use of real-time indicators. So we're all looking at this really rapid data, some of it daily, weekly, fortnightly, and terribly excited about its potential. And it has had huge potential. It's been really important. But I think the evaluation that goes on behind the scenes as to what to believe and how accurate a predictor it is of the more authoritative statistics that will follow is something we really need to keep an eye on. There's no point in getting very excited about something because you can get it daily if it's not very representative of what you're trying to look at. And Angus's point on the scale of some of the sort of, if I can call them off national accounts, the satellite accounts, is really well made. I think this is a whole industry to be explored. I think there's some great work going on internationally. As I said, I'd hope we could get a faster pace of innovation in this. I do think there's an element in which keeping that international comparability going is kind of holding countries back. So, I mean, that's something that I think would be a really good focus. But one thing, yet another plug for the ONS, which you'd expect from me, is actually some of the work we've been doing on household economics. You can go onto our website and you can plug in how many hours you spend on, laundry, or, how many hours my husband spends cooking meals, and discover what they would be paid in the private sector for those services. So some really interesting and actually quite fun, relatable things, which are there to shed light on the economy, but also, in fact, to get more people interested in statistics and the work that we do.
Amazing, thank you, Sam. Okay, let me just move very quickly to we have quite a few questions here now. So we have one from Danielle Kimmons, which is, do you collect social media data, keywords, word count, etc., to give you a more up-to-date steer? We have, I think I'm going to just join Angus' question here as well. I know he has been greedy, asking many questions, but it's also related to that data collection. So he says, in the towns and high streets, you mentioned social analysis. What are you looking to collect here? And actually, I will also abuse my role of chair and ask you, when it comes to data, really, or this culture of data collection, I would like you to talk to us a little bit about how hard it is to get data from the private sector. Do we need any kind of legislation here? Because, it's often said that the private sector has a lot of data, and, Google is like this big brother, really. So, either legal limits to access this data, and, would legislation be required? So I think I have like good set of questions for data. Now, let me see if there's any more on data. No, I think that's all. Yeah.
Look, they're really very stimulating questions. Thank you. They're all really interesting. The first one on social media data, the kind of keyword and word count thing. The answer is yes. We have been using that in government. It's very interesting to use this to look at public perceptions of new technology, for example. I mean, you think about data and digital. If you scan the broadsheets using, this advanced technology, how many comments that are made about the digital world are positive and how many are negative? And I mean, that was just so interesting to get a handle on some of that experimentation. And we have used that in a number of cases to kind of think about really what public perceptions were of particular things that are going on in the economy. So a big yes for that. I don't think we've published very much of that, to be fair, but it's something that we've certainly experimented with and is really interesting. And we've used it in job adverts to try and spot what skills are being looked for, and have a look at how let's say, major infrastructure projects were affecting local job markets. So yes, we've used that, but kind of internally, but very interesting. I hope we can do a lot more of that. Towns and high streets and the social analysis. Yes, I mean, this is something that's a work ongoing. I think it's a good example of how you've got to bring a total picture together to try and understand the sort of health of a high street or a town centre. So crime and health, the extent to which towns centres are used for recreation, as well as thinking about them as a kind of retail opportunity. So lots of issues bridging the economic and social in the town and high street piece. The private sector data is something that is a big focus for me actually in this new role, because more and more companies are being willing to share, and there are some that are willing to collaborate with us. I mentioned Revolut and Adzuna and Springboard, and there are many, many more. But the dealing with companies, what it teaches you is that they are very very careful with their data, as they should be. We should be relieved as an audience to hear that they're not bunging their data at anyone who asks. So, but that brings all sorts of ethical and legal questions to be gone through. So I've talked about these sort of data sharing agreements and MOUs, and these are new kind of legal forms that we are experimenting with to try and get the party to be able to explain to their users that the data has been shared in a safe way. Really interesting set of questions there, but encouraging that a lot of companies, quite often slightly cutting edge and new companies, are increasingly willing to partner with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. I think we are heading to our 3 last minutes. And I have a very interesting question here from Matt that I would like actually to end our discussion. And one from Mary Morgan, which is amazing. So here you go. I'm going to start with Mary Morgan's question, which is, given the established importance of maintaining the independence of National Statistical Office over time and over countries, how does your joint role in the ONS and the GES work? So, and I'm going to just add here Matt's last question, because I think actually it follows in a way, and I'm very curious to hear the answer as well, which is there anything you'd ask the profession to do more? And how would you like the profession to change moving forwards? So I think these 2 questions, and I have 3 minutes to expand a little bit on them. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Also very very interesting questions. So independence. So here in the ONS, we're civil servants, as we are in the GES. So actually there isn't such a conflict there as you would perhaps think. So we're all bound by the Civil Service Code to be objective. But I think there's also another sense in which these, I think, are more complements than tensions, and that is the fact that we are bringing the objective evidence to bear. So, in the role in the GES, I was quite often the bearer of some rather unfortunate evidence to the policy maker, and I think that is something that successive governments have actually been extremely understanding of and quite transparent about. I would reflect on the GES's contribution to long-term economic impacts of Brexit, for example, as something that publishing that in a febrile political environment was a very good sign that the sort of objectivity of the profession was respected by our political masters. And at the Office for National Statistics, I mean, obviously we want to be policy relevant. So we would take into account what questions they wanted to home in on, and what analysis that they were keen to do. And that's for the good of the citizen. But whatever the numbers actually show us are the numbers. And I think that is also kind of respected. And through my career, there's been a lot of moments where that independence was bolstered. Back in '97, I'm thinking about working on making the Bank of England independent, setting up the Office for Budget Responsibility after the financial crisis, and now coming here to the ONS. So the independence theme sits very well actually with the Government Economic Service career. Finally, what would I ask of the profession? I think accessibility is really very, very key. We need to open our analysis up. We need to make it more relatable. We need to think about who can understand it, to improve the kind of public discourse and avoid the sort of distortion that you do get between evidence and analysis and what you might see reported in the media. I think that's absolutely crucial. Bank of England did some really interesting work to try and make all their publications have a reading age of, I'm trying to remember, but a reading age of, let's say, 15 or something very accessible like that. And actually, that I think that's an onus on the government in particular, but also to a lot of the audience there. Make your thing, bring your thinking right down to the relatable level, and that way more people will benefit from it. Simple as that. But look, it's been really terrific coming today. Fantastic questions. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for coming. This was just fascinating. Lots of things to think about it. I enjoyed deeply, the audience as well. I must say, I enjoy knowing about the household economics. I didn't know about that. I'm sure the Women's Budget Group is doing similar work. There's a communication there, but it's just fascinating.
It turns out I should pay my husband $30,000 a year.
Oh, so let's just dismiss.
But I wouldn't be doing that.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here. I'm kind of was honored to chair that panel with you, and I hope to see you in the future very soon. And yes, we're going to have a break now for 15 minutes. And I see all of you help us stand with the first panel of the day, Cherry Bar, Gary Dominski. And again, Sam, a pleasure to have you here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sam. And I see everybody in 15 minutes. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Carolina. Bye.